In the Appalachian Highlands, there is a ridge where the trees grow too close and the fog clings like a second skin. Outsiders say the place feels wrong, though they can never explain why. The air is heavy, the ground seems unsteady beneath the boots, and even the birds are reluctant to break the silence. If you ask the locals, they will only shake their heads and say, "That's the land of the Brotherhood. Best not to go there." The story begins more than a century ago, with two brothers who shared everything: land, labor, even a single weather-beaten cabin at the edge of the hollow. They were farmers by trade, rough men hardened by the soil and the seasons. Neighbors called them pious, loyal to kin, unwilling to let outsiders dictate the rules of their family. But beneath their devotion lay a decision that would twist generations. They made a pact that no blood would leave their line. At first it sounded harmless, even protective. The brothers swore their children would not marry strangers from towns downriver or settlers drifting through. They called it keeping the family strong. But when cousins came of age, the pact demanded something darker. If the blood could not go out, then it must turn inward. Cousin to cousin, nephew to niece. What began as pride turned to obligation, and from obligation into ritual. The first weddings were not weddings at all, but secret unions whispered under kerosene light. There were no church bells, no preacher, no public celebration, only the presence of the brothers themselves, standing grim as judges, declaring that their pact was being honored. The cousins obeyed, not with love in their eyes, but with the dull resignation of livestock led into a pen. It did not take long for whispers to spread beyond the hollow. School teachers noticed children whose surnames matched on both sides of the ledger. Neighbors noticed boys calling their fathers uncle, girls calling their mothers sister. When travelers asked questions, the answers were muddled, evasive, delivered with a look that dared you to press further. Some say the land itself began to bend beneath the pact. Trees twisted at odd angles as though leaning away. The creek that once ran clear turned sluggish, pooling into dark, stagnant basins. Even the air seemed to thicken, carrying the sour smell of wood smoke and damp earth. Hunters who strayed too close reported seeing pairs of pale figures moving in the mist, always together, always too close. Cousins whose bond had been sealed not by choice, but by command. And though the pact was meant to strengthen, what it bred was weakness. Children grew sickly. Graves multiplied in the family plot behind the cabin. But still, the brothers persisted, demanding that the circle never be broken. They believed they had secured their legacy, bound their family in unshakable loyalty. Instead, they had sown the seeds of betrayal, not against outsiders but against their own blood. Even now, if you stand in that hollow at dusk, the wind carries strange sounds. Not the calls of owls or the rustle of deer, but something heavier, the echo of vows spoken in low, unwilling voices. Words that were never meant to be heard beyond those ridges. Words that betrayed brotherhood, family, and flesh itself. The curse of the cousin marriages had begun, and the hills would never forget. The story of the cursed cousin marriages might have been dismissed as rural gossip, one of those Appalachian tall tales whispered around campfires, if not for the records. Or rather, the gaps in the records. In the courthouse of the nearest town, census ledgers show names that repeat too often, birth years that overlap suspiciously, and households where every adult carried the same surname. At first glance, it looks like sloppy bookkeeping, but the deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes. This was no accident. Whole pages appear to have been altered, with ink darker in some lines, words scraped and written again. In the family Bible, dates of birth are carefully preserved, but marriage entries are conspicuously absent, as if love itself had no place in their story. The hollow where the brothers lived was already a place apart. Roads twisted away before reaching it, as if the land resisted intrusion. Most families moved out of such remote spots over time, pulled by mills, factories, or schools. But not them. The pact held. The bloodline remained bound to the soil and to itself. When outsiders did wander close, they told unsettling stories. A traveling preacher recalled arriving at the cabin one autumn evening, seeking shelter from a storm. Inside, he found the family gathered for what they called a joining. There was no scripture, No rings, no vows. Just the brothers, now old, with hair white as bone, presiding over the union of two young cousins who looked barely able to understand what was happening. He said their faces were blank, drained of all expression, as though they had already accepted a fate laid upon them before birth. The preacher left before dawn and never returned. Another tale comes from a doctor who once tried to offer his services in the hollow. He claimed the children he examined bore strange resemblances, not merely the likeness shared between siblings, but eerie reflections, as if the same face kept being born again and again, slightly altered with each generation. He reported frequent afflictions, weak hearts, clouded eyes, fragile bones. When he suggested breaking the pattern by seeking spouses outside the kin, the family shut their doors on him. He warned that the bloodline would collapse under its own weight. They did not listen. But not all traces of the curse are found in ledgers and testimonies. Some are carved directly into the land itself. Deep in the woods, hunters describe stumbling across crude stone markers, clustered together like miniature graves. Each bore the same initials, repeated over and over, as though the family had stopped bothering with unique names. The hunters claimed the air around those markers was colder than the rest of the forest, even on summer days. Stories multiplied, passed from mouth to ear, changing with each telling. Some insisted the brothers had been cursed by an outsider, perhaps a rejected suitor who swore their blood would rot from within. Others said the pact was a bargain with something darker, a spirit of the woods that promised protection so long as they kept their bloodlines sealed. A few even claimed that the brothers were never men at all, but something older, wearing human skin only to trick their kin into feeding the curse. Whatever the truth, the hollow became a place avoided. Maps shaded over it, roads bent around it, and even locals stopped speaking the family name. The land grew wilder, reclaiming barns and fences, swallowing the old cabin in ivy and rot. And yet on certain nights, lights could still be seen flickering in the distance, too steady to be fireflies and too faint for lanterns. The pact, it seemed, had not died with the brothers. The mystery is not just why the cousin marriages began, but why they persisted long after the first generation was gone. Why did no one flee? Why did no daughter run to the next town, no son carve his own life elsewhere? Was it fear of the brothers' wrath even from the grave? Or was it something deeper, an invisible hand binding them to their fate? These questions linger like the fog that clings to the hollow. No matter how many records are searched, no matter how many tales are gathered, the truth remains slippery, resisting light. Perhaps the real mystery is not just what happened in that hidden corner of Appalachia, but why silence itself seems to protect it. Because even now, generations later, when you ask about the hollow, people lower their voices. They shift in their seats. They look to the door as though expecting someone to be listening, and then they give the same answer they always have. That's family business. Best not to ask. The whispers and records only hint at what really happened in that hollow. But when you peel back the silence, the details spill out like something festering beneath a wound. These are not stories for comfort. They are fragments pieced together from testimony, from hidden letters, from the kind of tales neighbors swore they would take to the grave. The pact of cousin marriages did not end with one or two unions. It became a rhythm, repeated generation after generation, as natural to the family as planting corn or slaughtering hogs in the fall. The brothers had set the pattern, and their descendants followed it like scripture. The ceremonies grew stranger as the years passed. Early accounts spoke of unions held in secret, behind closed doors. But by the third generation, the joining was conducted in front of the entire family, no matter the age of the bride or groom. Infants were passed around, their futures already decided. A boy of 10 might be pointed toward his cousin of 7 and told, "One day, she'll be yours." These children grew up under the shadow of their fates, their play twisted into practice, their innocence stolen before they even knew what love meant. Neighbors who lived near the ridge reported hearing strange songs carried on the wind during these nights. Not hymns, not folk ballads, but low droning chants that rose and fell without melody. Some claimed they were not in English at all, but in some older tongue, guttural and harsh. Perhaps it was only nonsense syllables, Or perhaps the family had devised a private language of their own, one only blood could speak. The children born of these unions bore the weight of the curse most visibly. Some were stillborn, their bodies so malformed the family buried them in unmarked graves before dawn. Others survived but carried features that unsettled even their kin. Limbs too long for their torsos, jaws that jutted forward unnaturally, eyes set too close or too far apart. By adolescence, many developed tremors or growths beneath the skin. A few were described as childlike forever, their minds never progressing beyond infancy. And yet, through it all, the family clung to the pact. Outsiders offered help. Teachers suggested moving the children into proper schools. Doctors proposed remedies, even relocation. Each attempt was rebuffed with hostility. "We take care of our own," the men would say, standing shoulder to shoulder, daring anyone to challenge them. What outsiders did not see was the cruelty behind closed doors. Letters smuggled out by one daughter, who disappeared before reaching adulthood, described nights of unbearable silence punctuated by screams. She wrote of cousins forced into beds together under the eyes of elders, of punishments dealt to those who resisted. She spoke of being locked in the root cellar for days, with only a jar of cloudy water to sustain her, until she relented and agreed to her fate. Her words trail off into a desperate scrawl. "If I marry him, I become nothing. But if I refuse, I become nothing sooner." The punishments were not always physical. Sometimes they were ritual. A child who cried too loudly at the prospect of marriage was forced to sit in the family graveyard through the night, surrounded by headstones of their ancestors. "Learn where you came from," the elders would say. Many emerged from those vigils silent, eyes hollow, as if they had glimpsed something more terrifying than death itself. As the generations continued, the family became a closed circle, suspicious of all who lived beyond their ridge. They refused to sell their land, refused to trade livestock except under strict terms, and they watched outsiders with a gaze that felt more like surveillance than curiosity. Those who trespassed, hunters, loggers, surveyors, spoke of being followed by figures just beyond the tree line. They never saw a face, only the shape of kin standing too still among the shadows. By the 5th generation, the curse was undeniable. Graves outnumbered living kin. Children who survived to adulthood often did so with twisted spines, hobbled legs, or minds fractured by fear. Yet even then, some described them as eerily unified, moving in pairs, finishing each other's sentences, sometimes staring so intently at one another that outsiders swore they were communicating without words. The family Bible tells its own disturbing tale. Among the neat lists of births and deaths are pages where marriages should be recorded, but instead of dates and names, the margins are filled with strange marks, circles crossed by lines, spirals ending in arrows, symbols no historian has ever properly explained. To the family, these may have been sacred sigils, a secret script tying them closer to the pact. To everyone else, they are only reminders of how far the family strayed from the world outside their hollow. By the 6th generation, local folklore began to turn the family into something more than human. Farmers claimed their livestock sickened if driven too close to the ridge. Travelers spoke of a figure in the woods with two faces, one smiling and one weeping, peering at them through the branches. Children in nearby towns dared each other to climb the ridge and shout their own cousin's name, convinced the cursed family would answer in unison. There is one final chilling account, recorded by a schoolteacher who ignored the warnings and ventured into the hollow. She said the children she met were quiet, yes, but not ignorant. They asked her strange questions. Do you dream of your brother? Do you hear him call you at night? Would you marry your own blood if it meant you'd never be alone? She fled after only one evening, convinced the children were not merely victims, but participants in a system they no longer questioned. The betrayal of brotherhood had become complete. What began as loyalty between two men had curdled into generations of horror, each cousin bound not by love, but by chains invisible and unbreakable. And through it all, the family endured, as though endurance itself was the curse. To this day, those who wander near the hollow claim the ground feels softer there, as though it hides more bodies than roots. They say the fog lingers even in sunlight, and that sometimes, if you stand still enough, you can hear laughter. The laughter of children who never learned the difference between family and fate. The ridge stands quiet now. Most of the cabins have collapsed under their own rot, leaving only skeletal frames of wood and stone. To an outsider, it looks like any other abandoned Appalachian hollow, just another place swallowed by poverty and time. But those who know its history never mistake it for ordinary ruin. The silence here is heavy, deliberate, like the land itself remembers what it was forced to hold. Travelers report that the air changes when you cross the ridgeline. Birds grow quiet, the wind stops moving. Even the ground feels softer, as though the soil has been turned too many times, hiding secrets no map will admit. If you stand among the ruins, you may notice the outlines of graves, some marked, most not, sprawling in patterns that do not match Christian burial grounds. They spiral and loop like the family tree itself, closing in on itself again and again, until the graves seem less like a cemetery and more like a message carved into the earth. Locals say the last true members of the family died out in the mid-20th century. The final survivors scattered into nearby towns, marrying outsiders at last, trying to dissolve the curse into wider bloodlines. But the legacy could not be fully erased. Some of their children carried the same twisted features, the same strange mannerisms, the same hollow gaze that unnerved teachers and neighbors alike. More than one doctor quietly noted genetic markers that pointed to generations of cousin unions. It was proof written in bone and blood, even when the names had been changed. But what haunts most isn't the science. It's the feeling that the curse lingers, not just in descendants but in the land. Hunters who cross into the ridge often return pale and shaken. They speak of hearing voices call their names in the dark, voices that sound like their own kin, though no one is there. Campers say they've woken in the night to the sound of footsteps circling their tents, only to find no tracks in the morning. The strangest stories are the ones about reflection. Hikers have reported glimpsing faces in broken cabin windows, faces that look eerily like their own, but younger, thinner, and staring back with a knowing expression. One man swore he saw himself as a child, standing hand in hand with another boy who looked just like him, but with features subtly warped, as though kinship itself had been stretched too far. He refused to go back to the ridge, saying only, "It knows me." Even the graves refused to rest. A few years ago, heavy rains washed away a slope near the old homestead. Bones surfaced, dozens of them, many belonging to infants and children. Some were interred together in ways no coroner could explain. Cousins buried clasping hands, skeletons aligned face to face as though joined in some ritual union beyond death. The county reburied them quietly without ceremony and sealed the records, but locals claim the ground never settled properly again. It still sinks when you step on it, as if the earth is trying to breathe. The true horror of the cursed cousin marriages is not just what happened, but how easily it was hidden. Pages torn from ledgers, names erased from Bibles, families who chose silence over confrontation. Brotherhood betrayed, yes, but also community betrayed. Neighbors turned their heads. Authorities dismissed the whispers. And so the curse thrived, fed not only by blood but by willful blindness. And here is the final cruelty. Bloodlines scatter, but they do not vanish. Some of the descendants live among us still. They have new names, new homes, new histories, but in their quiet moments, do they hear the chants their ancestors whispered in the dark? Do they feel the pull of the pact their great-grandfathers swore on a hollow night? The ridge waits. It does not forget. Stand there at dusk and you will feel the weight of centuries pressing down, thick as fog. Some say the spirits of the cousins still wander, bound together by vows they never chose. Others believe the curse seeps into anyone who lingers too long, planting a seed of obsession, of fixation, of the kind of loyalty that curdles into betrayal. Perhaps the scariest thought of all is this: Brotherhood betrayed once can be betrayed again. The story of the ridge is not only a tale of the past, but a warning. For every family has secrets, every brother has envy, every pact can sour, and once blood is bound in the wrong way, it does not wash clean. So if you ever find yourself walking in those woods and the fog begins to rise, listen closely. You may hear the sound of children laughing, soft at first, then louder, circling you. Do not answer. Do not follow. Keep walking and never look back. Because if you do, you might see them. Cousins, hand in hand, watching you with eyes that look far too familiar. And in that moment, you will understand why the ridge is still feared. Because some betrayals echo long after the betrayers are gone.